All right, welcome back. The title of this mini lecture is The Cold War Till 1955. We're going to talk about five things that you need to know in order to really start kind of understanding this topic a little bit more. So let's get into it because it's a big topic. There's a lot to it. First off, containment. Okay, containment. Broadly, this is U.S. Cold War foreign policy beginning at the end of the 1940s and for the next few decades. We tended to take the position in the U.S. that communism is an existential threat to the security of the United States, to our system, to our way of life, and as a result, we needed to stop its spread. And so you needed to contain it where it existed. And you can see this in any number of speakers and writers and political leaders in the late 1940s and early 1950s, from George F. Kennan to President Harry Truman to many others. All right. Secondly, Stalinization. So, after World War II is over, the leader of the Soviet Union, Joseph Stalin, takes a hard line against many within the Soviet Union in order to try to redefine the terms of social and cultural and political life in the USSR, again, after the war is over. So this can relate to any number of aspects of life within those communities, from the treatment of individuals in this now Eastern Bloc of countries that the Soviet Union is controlling, to things like war remembrance or rations, any number of things. Right? Stalinization was a brutal practice, and it lasted for a number of years after the war was over. Third, the Marshall Plan. We cannot conceive today of how bad the humanitarian crisis was in Europe in 1945, and it lasted through 1946 into 1947, and there was a feeling that it was going to go on. There was also a feeling in Europe at the time that communism was gaining traction, it was gaining support in nations like France and Italy, and the United States was very concerned about this. So, the Secretary of State at the time, George Marshall, works with a number of European counterparts. The Americans ask them for what it is that they need. We start to put a package together. The acronym for this, for the legislation, was called the ERA, European Recovery or something like that. And what will happen is this is all passed in 1947. The U.S. is going to provide just over $10 billion of aid. That's in 1947 money. And yes, and part of the initial process for this is going to be immediate relief because of the humanitarian crisis. Part of this is going to be infrastructure, kind of shoring things up. And yes, absolutely, the United States saw part of their efforts in the Marshall Plan as a cute little ancillary benefit of, let's try to keep Western Europe from becoming communist, right? This is kind of part of this as well. All right, fourth, NATO. Now, NATO stands for the North Atlantic Treaty Organization. It's founded at the end of the 1940s, partly because or out of the Marshall Plan, the nations that joined the Marshall Plan, and a desire to be able to protect those nations, led by the United States, but also with European allies. Now, NATO still exists today, but its primary focus at the end of the 1940s and the early 1950s was preparing for a potential conflict with the Soviet Union. Now, the fifth thing would be the Warsaw Pact. Now, this was a Soviet agreement, a Soviet alliance that happens by the mid-1950s, in many ways coming on the heels of these actions that the United States and its Western European allies had taken. Again, there are any number of things for us to be thinking about when it comes to understanding the Cold War, and there's a lot of really, really, really good work to look into, to read more about it. Thank you very much.